Toronto FC have to date had 18 designated players. Some have been really good, some have been outright bad, but all are parts of the team's history. So let's go through all 18 TFC designated players and rank them on a scale of S for super down to F for outright terrible. We're gonna go in order of oldest signing to most recent designated player signing. Now there are some players on this list who spent time for Toronto FC as just not a designated player, so we're only looking at the time in which they were designated players for the purpose of this ranking. And also, of course, this ranking is going to take into account not just how they performed for TFC, but also the team's performances during that time, and also the hype level of these players coming into Toronto FC versus how they ended up performing. So first off, the first designated player that Toronto FC ever signed, Insigne De Guzman. Insigne De Guzman, the midfielder, was the first ever designated player signing by Toronto FC and the first ever Canadian designated player in Major League Soccer. He played 90 games over 3 seasons for Toronto FC, and this was 2009 to 2012. Toronto FC was not a very good team during that era, and Insigne De Guzman, he was fine, nothing spectacular, but he did his job on most nights. He wasn't really a problem, but he didn't help the team accomplish anything great. Insigne De Guzman is a C-tier designated player right in the middle. Next, we have the second designated player in Toronto FC history and the first disaster of a designated player in TFC history. Mista. Mista came in halfway through the 2010 season and he scored a goal early on in his TFC career in the CONCACAF Champions League and proceeded to score 0 goals in 9 appearances in Major League Soccer, leaving TFC at the end of the season. Mista, F-tier designated player. He was just a complete disaster. Danny Kovermans, the worst team in the world quote maker himself. Kovermans came to Toronto FC in 2011 and he was a weird player. When he was healthy, he had this league figured out. He could score. He had 8 goals in 10 appearances in 2011 and 9 goals in 16 appearances in 2012. When he was healthy, he was good. The problem was he just had issues staying healthy, and then halfway through the 2012 season, he tore his ACL, and that was an injury that basically ended his career. He would only play 3 more games for TFC in 2013, and then only another 3 games after that in his professional footballing career. So Kovermans, he could score, injuries held him back, and the team wasn't that great when he played, hence the worst team in the world comment. Honestly, Danny Kovermans is a C tier. He's a what could have been player. He wasn't great, but he wasn't bad. He did his job. He scored goals when he was healthy. It's just he couldn't stay healthy, and if he could stay healthy and score more goals, that would have lifted him up even higher. But Danny Kovermans, he was solid when he was healthy. He just couldn't stay there. Torsten Frings, the German defensive midfielder, was signed on the same day as Danny Kovermans. He was 34 when he joined TFC. His career was already nearing an end, and he was a solid midfielder making 44 appearances for Toronto FC. However, halfway through the 2012 season, he was injured, and that basically ended his career. So cut short because of injury, I'm putting him at D tier. He was fine, injuries cut it short, and that pushes him down from C. Eric Hasley might be one of the least known designated players in Toronto FC history. He only played 7 games for Toronto FC in the second half of the 2012 season. He was brought in as a replacement for the injured Danny Kovermans. He scored 3 goals in those 7 games. Like, again, he was a DP striker in the early 2010s who did his job, scored goals. He did have trouble staying healthy. He missed half the potential games he could have played for Toronto FC, but he scored 3 in the 7 he did play. E-tier designated player, just wasn't here very long. He scored when he was playing, so like when he was playing, he wasn't a complete disappointment, but he wasn't playing that often. Matthias Lava was signed as a young designated player prior to the 2013 season, and making this list, he was the only one of these guys that I had actually never heard of. I didn't remember him at all. A defensive midfielder, he only made 16 appearances in 2013 and then was traded to the Whitecaps for nothing at the end of the season to make room for Jermaine Defoe and Michael Bradley in the designated player spots. Laba was an experiment of a young designated player, but he was just meh. I mean, he did play some games, but he missed basically half the season. E-tier designated player. Gilberto, the forgotten striker designated player of the Jermaine Defoe year. Gilberto scored 7 goals in 28 matches in Major League Soccer. I mean, that's not the goal scoring output you would expect of a designated player, but unlike Jermaine Defoe, as the season went on, he didn't just give up on the team. He stuck around and like kept playing. He ended up playing the majority of the season. So Gilberto, I mean, if you get 7+ goals a season out of a player, that's fine. I mean, you'd expect better, but also like 2014 TFC overall wasn't the greatest team, and Gilberto isn't the type of guy to just run an offense in MLS. Gilberto, I say, is a D tier designated player. He wasn't terrible. There wasn't a huge amount of hype around him to make his 7 goals seem bad. Just D tier, not great, below average. Jermaine Defoe, the bloody big disappointment. Defoe was massive when he signed with Toronto FC. We all remember the bloody big deal. This the first thing that really got international attention onto this team. And he came to MLS and he came out of the gate flying. He had 11 goals in his first 13 matches for Toronto FC. He was great at the beginning. And then he quickly got homesick, he quickly had some injuries, he quickly, very obviously, didn't like Toronto and didn't want to be here. And so after July of 2014, he only played 4 more matches, and basically the second half of the season in MLS, he gave up really quickly and then ran back to England in the deal that became known as the bloody big disappointment. Jermaine Defoe, he's a D tier designated player. He's not F tier because, like, when he showed up, the hype was real. He was great for those first 13 games he played for Toronto FC. The hype was real, and for the first few months, he lived up to it. And so just because those first 2 months were magical, Jermaine Defoe squeaks out of F tier and into E. Michael Bradley, signed in the same winter as Jermaine Defoe. Michael Bradley, captain since 2015 of Toronto FC. He's been around for almost 10 years now. Won 2017 MLS Cup, led the team to the 2017-2019 MLS Cup Finals, 2018 CONCACAF Champions League Final. Michael Bradley is just the best captain in team history. And yes, in the past couple years, there have been some negative aspects to Michael Bradley. People are getting a little sick of Michael Bradley being regular in the midfield. But after 2019, he stepped down as a designated player, signing a TAM deal. And removing everything after 2019, looking at just the 5 years he spent as a designated player, Michael Bradley is an S tier designated player. He was everything we could have asked for, solid in the midfield, led the team to 3 finals in 5 years as captain. As a designated player, there is almost nothing more you could have asked out of the Michael Bradley designated player era. So Michael Bradley, S tier designated player. Sebastian Giovinco, just S tier, need I say more, the best player in Toronto FC history, TFC's all-time leading scorer, 2015 MLS MVP, 3-time MLS Team of the Season. Just what a player Sebastian Giovinco was, the legend of Toronto FC. Like, no other player even comes close to the level of legendary status that Sebastian Giovinco has in the hearts of Toronto FC fans. Jozy Altidore, second all-time in TFC goals behind Giovinco. Jozy Altidore is the epitome of you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. 2015 to 2019, Jozy Altidore was great. He was scoring on all cylinders. In the 2016 playoffs especially, he was a monster. But 2020, 2021, he was feuding with the front office. He was injured all the time. He wasn't scoring. His ego was too big for the performances he was giving at the time. Like, the fan base did not like 2020, 2021 Jozy Altidore. I think those last 2 years take him out of the S tier and into the A tier. Like, if Jozy Altidore, same time Michael Bradley stepped down as a DP in 2019, had Jozy Altidore after 2019 said, "That said, I'm not a DP anymore," he'd be S tier. But those last 2 seasons just were too bad, and he took up a designated player spot when he did not deserve one for too long for him to still be S tier. He's A tier now. Alejandro Pozuelo, 30 goals in 100 appearances for Toronto FC. He came in 2019, was fantastic in 2019, was the key figure in that 2019 MLS Finals run. 2020, he won MLS MVP, being the second TFC player ever to do that after Sebastian Giovinco. Those 2 seasons of Pozuelo were pure magic. And then 2021 happened, he only scored 1 goal. 2022 happened, he wasn't great in the start of the season, and he was traded mid-season to make room for Bernardeschi. Like, after 2020, he only had 7 goals in 39 appearances for Toronto FC. The fall off was massive, and again, had he kept up what he did those first 2 seasons for TFC, he would have been S tier. But those last 2 seasons were too bad to ignore. A tier only for Pozuelo. Pablo Piatti, brought in for the 2020 season. Pablo Piatti made 19 appearances for TFC, scoring 4 goals. Another guy where, like, he was fine, he wasn't great, didn't really live up to the designated player expectation. Like, he was just a little underwhelming the whole season, and he wasn't really missed when he didn't sign an extension for 2021. Piatti was E tier. Jefferson Soteldo, the 2021 DP of the year. Soteldo is another one like Piatti, where he came in, had some expectation. Soteldo, I thought, actually had a better start to his Toronto FC career than Piatti did. Like, Soteldo showed flashes of potential brilliance in MLS. It just was that 2021 season, TFC was just so bad. He really had no support. Like, he was crossing the ball in to Patrick Mullins. So, like, you can't really blame Soteldo that much. The team around him was terrible, but also, like, as the season went on, his ego became a bit of an issue. There was some infighting with Soteldo, and he was traded off in a direct swap for Carlos Salcedo at the end of the season. Soteldo, I mean, remove the ego stuff, maybe you could say he's D tier, but I think Soteldo overall is an E tier designated player. Carlos Salcedo, the first defender designated player in club history, did not make the defense any better in 2022. The first half of the 2022 season, the defense still sucked even though we had Carlos Salcedo. It was just shocking how a designated player defender didn't perform any better than your regular run-of-the-mill MLS defender, really. I mean, like, yeah, he could play the ball, but defensively, he was just not as good as you would expect a designated player center back. He only made 16 appearances for TFC and was let go mid-season in 2022. Salcedo is an F tier designated player, did not make the team better at all when he was here. Lorenzo Insigne, the most hyped up designated player since Jermaine Defoe for Toronto FC coming in. People thought that this was the real bloody big deal. This was it. And the Insigne era in Toronto FC has been an unmitigated disaster. For a guy who was coming into MLS the most paid player in the league, he has in 27 appearances for Toronto FC only scored 10 goals. He's been regularly injured, and when he has been healthy, he just visibly has not been at 100%. Like, sure, last season in 2022, he had 6 goals in 10 games, whatever, that's like fine, but not up to the level you'd expect from Insigne. And also, he was injured on and off for the whole back end of the season last year, and this season he's just been a complete disaster. All the hype of Defoe, but he didn't even have the same quality of start to his TFC career that Jermaine Defoe had. Insigne is an F tier DP. Federico Bernardeschi, 11 goals in 37 appearances, another disappointing Italian. Now, Bernardeschi, his 2022 closeout to the season was incredible. He had 8 goals in the closeout to 2022. He was so much better than people expected. I thought people thought that he was going to be the real true Italian, like the successor to Sebastian Giovinco as star designated player. And then this season has just been a complete disaster for Bernardeschi. He hasn't been good. He's been arguing with the coach. He argued with Bob Bradley. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on. Supposedly him and Insigne were fighting with each other. Bernardeschi this season has been a complete disaster. That would make him F tier. However, his last season was really good. So last season drags Bernardeschi out of the F tier into the E tier, but I just can't put him any higher given how bad this season has been. And finally, Jonathan Osorio. Now, Jonathan Osorio, I feel so bad for because, like, he's a designated player basically in name only. He's signed to what should be a TAM contract, but because TFC didn't have a third DP going into the season, they decided to just name Osorio a DP for cap reasons, even though his salary could be bought down to a TAM contract. And so in 2023, as a designated player, Jonathan Osorio has just 1 goal in 13 appearances, and this has been his worst season for Toronto FC. And I just feel bad because I'm ranking these guys based off of their time as a designated player. And like all time as a player, Jonathan Osorio is like an A tier player for Toronto FC. He just so happened to have his worst season ever in the season that he's a designated player. And so like as a DP, Osorio is E tier. Like he hasn't had a good season, and that's his DP season. It's just disappointing. Like for everything he's done for Toronto FC, he probably deserves the money, but he doesn't deserve to have the onus of designated player on him. And like he's not good enough to be a designated player right now. It sucks, and it's heartbreaking that in the rules of this tier list, that's where I gotta put him, but unfortunately just Osorio has not been good as a DP. So there you have it, the 18 designated players for Toronto FC all ranked. As you probably have noticed, a lot of guys below C and very few guys above it. Toronto FC as a team has had a couple very, very good designated player signings and then a lot of bad ones. Very few in the middle. Very few decent DPs and just not enough good DPs. Like the designated player category has just been an enigma for Toronto FC the whole time. When the only time we've run a couple DPs for like more than a couple seasons was the Bradley, Altidore, Giovinco era, when we had the best DPs we've ever had. But just beyond the Bezbachenko era, the DP signings this team has made have just been atrocious, and even Insigne and Bernardeschi, who I think everyone had really high hopes for, have just turned out to be disastrous DP signings so far. You know, maybe they could turn things around, and maybe if I do another one of these rankings 3 years down the road, Insigne and Bernardeschi could have redeemed themselves and be a bit higher, but as of yet, even those signings have been bad. So that is for this video. As always, if you'd like to hit like, if you want to see more of my stuff, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, link is down below in the description, and I will see you next time.